9:05, welcome back to the Chad Hasty Show on News Talk 95.1 FM and 790 AM KFYO. In studio with me right now, I'm very excited about this, the director of the Free Market Institute over at Texas Tech University, good friend of the program, Dr. Benjamin Powell. Welcome back. How are you today?
Hey, Chad. I'm doing great. Always good to be with you, man.
Yeah, always good to have you here. And today we're not really talking about events happening over at the Institute, though we'll touch on that a little bit later. You've got a brand new book out, Socialism Sucks, Two Economists Drink Their Way Through the Unfree World. This is awesome.
Yeah, this is very different than anything I've ever written before. So my co-author and I, Bob Lawson, we could have written one more boring academic journal article that 5 people in the world read. Or we saw this kind of rising popularity of socialism, particularly with younger people. This project started a couple of years ago in 2016, and we said, let's try to write something that more people will read, that we can reach a wider audience. So it's kind of done in the style of the publisher actually called it the bastard stepchild of Anthony Bourdain and Milton Friedman.
Okay, all right.
So it's replaced the food with economics and history of socialist countries, and it's our travels through these countries over the last, 2.5, 3 years, and writing that up in a way that should be accessible and entertaining for people. It's also the case that my co-author wanted to get drunk in Cuba a few years ago, and I figured I'd find a way to write it off my taxes if we did a book.
And this, it does, I mean, just it does kind of remind me of an Anthony Bourdain type deal, where he would go through all these different nations and eat. Well, y'all went through these nations, and you're telling the story of socialism in this book. It's still, you're educating people, but, this is, like you said, it's not going to be in a way that is necessarily in an academic where, younger people or anyone who picked this book up, they're not going to be beaten over the head.
Yeah, it's a deadly serious subject, literally, 100 million lives last century. So we had our history in there, and the economics is sound as well. But it's, done in a very palatable manner where it's in the course of our travels, descriptions, and drinking in these countries. And actually the drinks in these countries really does serve as a metaphor for like how the overall economy functions there. Worst case, Chad, dude, Venezuela, they ran out of beer. The whole country. I don't know about you, but if I was a socialist dictator, like toilet paper, beer, these would be like the top 2 things I make sure we don't run out of. But what they have is a monopoly beer producer, Polar, and the government planners didn't allocate enough foreign exchange for them to import barley. No barley, no beer.
Right.
One beer producer, no beer. So the whole country ran out. But this, of course, reflects what's going on in Venezuela overall, where in the last year or so, people lost an average of 24 pounds. They didn't discover Jenny Craig. It's that they can't produce the food to feed themselves, and just like the beer, the country was out of it. That was probably the worst one that we visited like that.
So, how many countries did y'all visit over the last, because you said the project started back in 2016. How many countries did y'all visit?
Yeah. So I think I've probably been to around 50 countries or so overall, same with my co-author. But for this book, we went to Sweden, Venezuela, Cuba, Korea, China, Russia, Ukraine, the Republic of Georgia, and then the last chapter is back in the USSA when we attended the largest socialist gathering in the country.
Oh, wow. Okay, so I want to ask you about Sweden first, because Sweden is always when you look at like the Democrat Socialist of America, when you look at Bernie, when you see some of the presidential candidates, they don't point to Venezuela as, hey, we want to do what Venezuela is doing.
Now, people would have 6 years ago, remember. That was successful
yes.
democratic socialism when oil prices were high.
That's true. But not now. Now they point, it's always Sweden. Look, it's like the Swedes are doing great. They're doing wonderful. Tell us a little bit about Sweden and what you found out there.
Yeah, the chapter's called Sweden, Not Socialism, because it's based on private property and markets. Volvo is a private company. The restaurants are privately owned. The food is privately produced. The beer is privately brewed. It's basically a market economy where prices and profit and loss coordinate economic activity. But what they have is a big welfare state. They have a big welfare state with high taxes. And I think that has problems. That slowed their rate of growth. At one point, they were the 4th richest country in the world. Now they're in the bottom half of the OECD. So it didn't impoverish them the way socialism impoverishes Venezuela and others. Because, by the way, Venezuela used to be rich. Go back to 1970, they had a higher average income than Spain itself. but the socialism there has utterly destroyed Venezuela. Sweden's case, it's a big welfare state that slowed down their growth, so in relative terms, they're not as wealthy as they could be, but it's a far cry from socialism. And by the way, that's reflected in the beer. It's delicious, and you get it from around the world there, except you pay more for a Belgian beer in Sweden than they pay for it here in Lubbock because they tax the bejesus out of everything there.
What is the best beer that y'all had? Was it in Sweden?
Well, I love Belgian quadruples, and they had them in Sweden, but we had them in Korea too, because they're all over the world. In fact, we even have them in China. I don't know about the best beer, but I'll tell you the best alcohol experience I had among all these countries and seeing a transformation was the Republic of Georgia, former Soviet republic. They essentially did no reforms from the fall of the Soviet Union to 2004. They have the Rose Revolution. A reformer president comes in who was educated here in the United States, but he puts like a libertarian finance minister in place. And the guy fires entire bureaus, slashes spending, lowers taxes, does transparent privatization where they just auction things online, unlike the Soviet crony privatization that went on in Russia and Ukraine. The place is booming. Also, its wine industry is, and I love wine.
Yes, you do.
Now, Georgia produced wine in Soviet times, but because the Soviet central planners were commies, not idiots, they understood Siberia wasn't good for wine production. But they used international grapes we're all familiar with, Cabernet Merlot, and they planted them on farms where they had high productivity and crappy wine. Since it's gone capitalist, and Georgia, by the way, now ranks in the top 10 freest economies in the world. Since it's gone capitalist, all those grapes have been pulled up. Those fields have gone fallow. They've moved back to the hills, indigenous Georgian grapes, their own process. For the whites, they leave the stems and skins on when they press them, so you get like this golden color wine, and they age them in vats underground. Kind of unique in how they do that. Everything's unique, and it's delicious. Wonderful stuff, I'd say. And the transformation you see in Georgia's wine industry is, again, a metaphor of what's happened to the country. As they've gone through this radical free market reform, they're booming and doing great. It's a wonderful place to visit. Hard to get to, probably 23 hours of travel from Lubbock and at least 3 flights.
Wow. Visiting with Dr. Benjamin Powell, co-author of Socialism Sucks. 2 economists drink their way through the unfree world. You said you also attended one of the largest socialist gatherings here in America, right?
Yeah, we went to Socialism 2018 last summer and talked to a lot of young people.
Did you
there.
Stand out?
Yeah. Now, I was dressed like this, khakis and a shirt. My co-author, who's from Cincinnati, he thought it'd be funny. He wore a Cincinnati Reds jersey.
Okay. Yeah.
I don't think they got the joke. But really how he stood out most was our age. It was 35 and under people for the most part. And then the next group would be people in their 70s who were ex-1960s hippies.
Okay.
People who came of age during Reagan years or early 90s. They are non-existent, not non-existent, but few and far between there.
Yeah.
But yeah, and we didn't go there to argue with people or to lecture them on economics. I went there to try to understand them. And I talked to lots of these young people and asked them, what's brought you here? What attracts you to socialism? And one thing there's kind of 2 types of answers that I got. Almost half of them, it was almost a very encouraging answer because they weren't there for socialism. Socialism means government ownership or control over your major factors of production. And when I bring that up to them, they say, oh, no, I don't really think about that. I'm just, and now pick your issue, whether it's environment, gender issues, migrants, police, pick some issue that they're just far to the left of the Democratic Party and see a problem in the United States and think socialism is the answer. A lot of these kids, some of them are people who 8 years ago would have been youth for Ron Paul, who are now youth for Bernie Sanders. Mm-hmm. They see an outsider railing against the crony establishment in Washington, and they don't really understand the differences in the solution, but they like the rage against the machine kind of.
Right.
So I think there's a lot of hope for them if people like me who do books like this and other free market people reach out to them and say, listen, I sympathize with some of the things you're concerned with, but the answer is greater freedom, free markets, civil society, voluntary order, not state control and ownership. I think they're reachable if we don't just shun them and dismiss them as crazies.
Yeah.
Now, that said, there were crazies there too. People who legitimately mean, I want to nationalize the means of production. Now, for them, though, they play this little game because Venezuela, Korea, Cuba, Soviet Union, no, that's not socialism how I mean it. For them, they want socialism from below, or the magic word democratic socialism, which somehow means all of the things bad about socialism aren't there.
Yeah.
So
it's the good socialism.
Yeah, and for them, what they miss is the necessary connection between economic and political freedoms. Once you create a socialist economy, you necessarily have to have some form of central planning because your hippie commune can't make an iPhone, comrade. So that means without prices and profit and loss, you need a plan. Once you have a plan, you've centralized power. Socialist planning necessarily can't equal capitalism, so you get economic stagnation. Voters don't like that. So you'd usually vote the bums out of office. But once you've centralized economic power, you can crack down and not allow opposition. This is exactly what Venezuela was. Venezuela was democratic socialism. Chavez was freely elected in fair elections. As the economies collapsed under Maduro, now the state employees are told they have to vote for him or they lose their job. Food aid is handed out at the polling places. Opposition parties are repressed. The assembly has named an interim president in Venezuela, who Maduro's used the military to oppose. Democratic socialism transitions to mere socialism.
And how fast? I mean, I know we saw that in Venezuela. How fast can that happen?
I don't think there's a precise rule. I mean, Venezuela, it happened more slowly than one might suspect because the high oil prices masked the carnage that was going on. So they sit on the world's largest oil reserves. And initially, while their economy was collapsing, the government just used the money earned from oil sales to buy goodies and hand them out. So people weren't that upset. Under Chavez, it looked good. And in fact, this is when, your Sean Penns and Michael Moores in the United States are saying, look, Venezuelan socialism works. It's like, no, their food production is plummeting. Food imports are rising, and they're just masking it with this oil sales. Now, when oil came down in 2013-14, incidentally, right around the time of Chavez's death, the game was up. But we know that socialists now will say, well, the oil crash killed Venezuela. We live near the Permian Basin. It didn't kill our area. Yeah. We're still growing and booming, so is the Permian Basin. Saudi Arabia didn't collapse. It was just masking the carnage of socialism. So it was slower there than it might be other places. And it's really a warning country because that was one of the more striking places when I visited because you saw upper middle class people traveling across a border to Colombia to get basic necessities. And it was like, oh, yeah, this isn't normal third world poverty. This is a place that was relatively wealthy that's collapsed. And it's a warning for what democratic socialism could do in a place like the United States as well. Yeah,
absolutely. Socialism Sucks. Two economists drink their way through the unfree world. You can pick it up on Amazon, right? It's #1 bestseller on Amazon.
In the category of socialism and communism, and at one point also in the category of beer.
Nice.
This wasn't a life goal, but it was an accomplishment.
So you can pick it up there, and let's see, you can also, I guess you can get it on the Kindle and all that kind of stuff, right?
Kindle, audiobook, hardcover, barnesandnoble.com, amazon.com. I haven't walked over to the Barnes & Noble at South Plains Mall yet, but I hope it's there too.
Yeah, all right. So Socialism Sucks, you can pick that up. Before we let you go.
If it's not, tell them you want it there.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we let you go, y'all've got another big semester coming up over at Texas Tech and the Free Market Institute.
Yeah, big public event for us coming up. Our first one's actually on the economics of slavery and the Civil War in September. This is all up on our website, fmi.ttu.edu. But then our big one this fall, we're going to have George Willian on October 10th for, I believe, a 5:30 p.m. public lecture. And would love to have everybody come out for that the way we've come out for Walter Williams and Stossel and others before.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Dr. Benjamin Powell, always a pleasure to have you in studio. And congratulations on the book. It's a hit. I mean, people who have read it that I know love it. So good job.
All right. Thanks,
Looking
Chad.
forward to the sequel.
Yeah.